The other thing, just to take this as an interesting example, so I think one of the things you probably have to ask yourself when you do the My Take part of the newsletter is how far you're willing to go, and are you ultimately going to kind of really seem to be taking a side. And so with this, one of the points that you made, and it's a good point, is that a lot of this gerrymandering would be harder to do and maybe perceived as less efficacious if there were ranked choice voting. I would throw in multi-member districts, which seems to go along with that idea. Now, I think what you didn't say at the end of all that is most of the impetus for that is coming from Democrats. In other words, the groups that you cite as being willing to propose things like that are, and the Fair Representation Act, which I think just got reintroduced in this session, was introduced by Jamie Raskin and Don Beyer. I think that, I mean, a thing you could have said is the Republicans don't seem very interested in doing that. And I kind of admire your restraint for not saying that, but say a little bit more about what your thinking is in a situation like that.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's, I've limited space and it's a huge can of worms to open to explain why Republicans are increasingly resistant to something like open primaries or ranked choice voting. Many of the groups whose work I really admire on that issue in particular, like Unite America, I think they would tell you that Republican voters are actually pretty open to those ideas, but in many of the states where they're being proposed, Republican politicians understand that it's a threat to their power, and so they're doing their best to basically push the proposal through the partisan meat grinder and have it come out on the other end as an issue that's left, right, red, blue. So I almost don't want to cede the point that we're starting to see something like ranked choice voting or open primaries become a partisan issue, because I think there's still a really winning argument that appeals to both the left and the right, which is just like one person, one vote. We should all get to participate in every election, whether it's a primary race or, a general election. Like, you should be allowed to vote in it. And I think that's a good message that most Americans will feel resonates for them. And, if you're a Republican who lives in New York City, that's going to give you more power than you'd have otherwise. So that's one thing. And then as far as just like generally zooming out the restraint, I mean, my North Star and my promise to readers is not that I'm going to be a centrist. I think that is an ideology of its own. If like you have argument A and argument C and you always pick point B in between those two things, like that is an ideology that I don't think is effective or helpful. They're just as flawed as, being ideologically right or left on every issue. My North Star is I'm going to be honest about what I really, truly think about this issue. And I'm going to tell you what I think. And like, sometimes that's going to piss you off. And sometimes you're going to feel like I'm really representing your viewpoint. And other times, hopefully, I'll say something or, present a thought or argument that you haven't heard before. I think I'm well positioned to do the work that I do because of my upbringing and my own personal politics and just how I see the world. But I really, truly try my best not to pull punches and not to avoid certain criticisms or landmines because I'm afraid of what my readers are going to think or how they're going to react. I mean, I don't want to be captured by their views. I am making a promise that I'm going to tell you what I really believe about this issue, and you can take it or leave it or argue with me, and I'm open to changing my mind, which I do sometimes. And most people respond well to that, though, of course, if you're reading the newsletter for the first time and on day one, I'm hammering Democrats or Republicans, you might make a bunch of assumptions about my views that are probably inaccurate.
Yeah. First of all, I if I haven't made this clear, I think you do an amazing job. I think Tangle's really amazing. I was on Alec Baldwin's podcast, and he asked me what was a good newsletter, and I said Tangle. I think what you do is really, really impressive, and there's just a sanity to it that I think we're all kind of thirsty for. But I think also one of the things you've already kind of alluded to this as you explain the methodology, but what the right is saying, what the left is saying, that's complicated too. I mean, I've been thinking about that this week, that it used to be if you wanted to know what conservative orthodoxy was saying, you would read the Wall Street Journal editorial page. But the Wall Street Journal editorial page at times seems very much in conflict with a huge cohort of kind of MAGA-influenced conservative thinking, right? The Wall Street Journal editorial pages often go, they're doing what? That's not conservatism. So in a sense, the voice of the right is much more fractured maybe even than it was, say, in the Reagan era.
Uh, totally. I mean, I think the biggest challenge that we have in sort of aggregating these opinions and elevating them to people is that the left and the right, conservative and liberal, it's not a fixed pole. It moves. And, there are people like Hiram Lewis and Verlin Lewis who have done awesome writing about this. They're not related, but they co-authored a book called The Myth of the Left and the Right. They're Tangle readers, actually, and they have been insisting that I change the format from what the left is saying to what the right is saying to something different because they think I'm sort of reinforcing this idea. The struggle with it is that there are two political tribes that I think are pretty easy to distinguish in our country. The Wall Street Journal editorial board breaks from Trump and disagrees with him a lot of what he does, but they're still going to endorse him for president over Joe Biden. I mean, they're a member of his tribe, even though they're a dissenting voice. And I think what's useful for people is understanding kind of where the two major political tribes are breaking on specific issues. And you could say the same about the left. I mean, the progressive left and the sort of more establishment, moderate Democratic left, they have a lot of tension right now, and it's less apparent because they're not in power and they don't have control. But throughout the Biden presidency, we saw it, especially on issues like Israel and Gaza, on student loans. There was a lot of infighting and sniping and friction. And we try to illustrate that too. I don't think it's just the right that has these fractures. And I think it's good for people to understand, look, these two political parties have ideological diversity within their ranks. I think that's a healthy thing for Americans to embrace, because it creates room to disagree with and criticize your own side, and also look at the other side and say, oh, they have some ideas that I actually appreciate.